John left the corporate world after 24 years, and over the past 5 years, he's created a TV pilot about sustainable living, helped launch a game-changing startup on a mission to make the world a better place, and created J3 Films with his partners Jack and Jamie to present stories that encourage audiences to ask questions and challenge conventional wisdom. The award-winning Extraordinary, the Stan Romanek story, is his first long-form documentary film. We're going to go ahead and bring John on. We're going to talk about him and his work and Stan, and I think we're going to learn a lot tonight. John, good evening. Uh-oh. I think I just dumped him accidentally. John, are you there? Hold on one second. Let's see if we get John to call back. I think because I'm not doing the show 6 nights a week anymore, the spirits of K-Talk Radio here, the paranormal things here in the studio, the ghosts and gremlins of the board are getting me. So hopefully we'll get John back in just a second. The overview of the film is Stan Romanek claims to be at the center of the world's most documented extraterrestrial contact story, and the multitude of evidence accumulated over the past decade has convinced thousands around the world of his story is true. The documentary film Extraordinary, the Stan Romanek story, takes audiences on a journey to help through Stan's past. Let's see if we got John. John, do we got you this time?
Yeah, I heard everything, and then you said I'm going to click over, and then it clicked, and I heard nothing.
Man, I'm sorry. It's been a long day today. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Really good. John, I read your bio. We didn't even scratch the surface, but how did you get into filmmaking? How did you get into doing what you're doing? If you could give us a little bit of the backstory.
Yeah, I think it goes back to when I was a little kid, probably the whole idea of creating stories and storytelling and visual stories. Big movie buff when I was a little kid, big Steven Spielberg fan way back in the day, going all the way back to Sugarland Express and the TV movie they did, Duel. So it was that whole idea of someday getting into the film world, and I always wanted to do that. And I was in corporate marketing, senior executive for many years, and during that period of time, I had a chance to work on some small corporate video projects, and the company that I worked for used to do a holiday video every year. It was a fun half-hour thing, and I got involved with that, and I did it every year for about 12, 13 years, and really got deeper and deeper into it every year that I did it and learned more and more. So self-taught in everything that I've done over the years, and just got to a point where I was looking for projects to do that would give me an opportunity to do something bigger. So the first project was back in the late 90s, came up with a television show concept for Hauntings, which was very similar to Most Haunted, the show that kind of came out and made the whole paranormal thing big in the mid-2000s. And we had that idea and were pitching it around back in the late 90s, and nobody was interested in it because it was a little bit too fringy at the time. But it eventually found its sweet spot and took off from there. It was involved, work was always something that was a priority. My primary job, I always had a passion for doing these other projects, and then had an opportunity when I moved out to Seattle in 2009 to work on a television pilot for a show about sustainable living called Mission Sustainable, and we put together a 44-minute pilot proof of concept and shopped that around and didn't have much success in finding the right people for that. So this was the next opportunity for me, was to work on this project. And it actually started out as me and one of the J3 Films partners, Jack Roth, planning on doing a road trip film in New Mexico. We wanted to spend some time going from different locations, UFO locations in New Mexico, and he was going to be the on-camera personality, and I was going to do all the tech stuff in the background. And as we were planning that journey, we found out about Stan's story, and that kind of came front and center for us once it was presented to us. That's a long answer to a short question.
Well, hey, doing what you feel, doing what you believe in, and your passion is the big thing. And I've had a lot of independent filmmakers on the program, and I've been in radio for a while. I tangled with local television here, small digital station, and I'll tell you what, just trying to get some sort of programming, one show, one program off the ground, people don't realize what it takes. You know, when we watch the big networks like NBC and CBS and ABC, you know, what they don't realize is, or just look at a film, look at a movie, just sit there one time at the ending credits and look at how many tens of thousands of people are there.
Right.
You know, and people just don't seem to understand what it takes and the passion that it has to make something like this. And my hat's off to you and all the filmmakers out there. It's a ton of work, and you've got to love doing it because it's late hours and it's a thankless job, and it's in most cases pretty much of a payless job too. It is. It's tough.
Hit the nail on the head with that. You know, it's the biggest part I think with any film. There are people who go out there and make a film on a credit card, you know, for $5 or $10,000, and it's a passion project, and they can get it out there. But the bigger issue with stuff like that is, do you have the right technical resources to make it a high quality?
Right.
So there's a lot of I don't want to discredit the independent filmmaker community, because I think even 6-second vines are pretty awesome when they're done well. So you know, when you have people, we have so much access to the ability to create stories in a shorter time frame and do some pretty decent technical work on the post-production side. But people just learn how to use the basic tools that are now available. But I think there's a difference between something that is a hobby and then a difference when you take it to that next level and put some production values in there that require more money.
Right.
For the independent filmmaker, the hardest part of the job is really finding the path to money. And there are so many great ideas probably out there today, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, that don't get to the screen because they just can't find the right pathway. And that was part of our journey too. Our intention from the very beginning was to make a film that would be a theatrical release, whether it was for a weekend or whatever. But our intention was to make something that was something that would catch the eye of distributors and have some interest in that. But then you start to go down the pathway of all the things that have to line up for that to happen, and it really is about connections and who you know.
Right, exactly.
Because we had some insiders into Hollywood at several meetings, you know, in LA that kind of opened our eyes to what the potential was. And the one thing that I could say early on was that there was there was more interest in Stan's story for a feature film than there was for a documentary film, in the sense that my reaction to some of the things the conversations that I was involved with and the interest that there was that they were going to do a disservice, not intentionally, but it wouldn't have served Stan's story right to have a feature film made first. It made a lot more sense to me to get his story out based on what has happened. So, you know, the big thing about the way that we made this film is that we wanted to present something, you know, document what has happened to him.
Right.
And present it in a way that would allow people to draw their own conclusions, make their own assumptions about what it was that they just saw, versus an expose or a investigative story. It was more a matter, I'm a storyteller. I'm not a ufologist. I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool field researcher when it comes to this. I saw this as a very interesting story once I was brought into it, read his book, did some research. And the deeper and deeper I got into his story, I realized that there was so much documented evidence that it was unique and it was something worth telling. So we wanted to really take the audience on a journey of tremendous amount of evidence all at once, up front, and then an emotional connection to Stan and his wife Lisa, and then validation with the experts that have been involved in this case for years.
Well, I've had the opportunity to interview them both. I've had Lisa on the show and Stan on the show, and let's talk a little bit about things. Let's kind of get into the crux of things. And you know, I'm gonna go out a little bit on a limb, and of course, some things have happened with Stan. Some allegations have happened, and I'm not a ufologist myself by any means, John. I'm a talk show radio host. My wife and I mean, we do this show because we want to allow people like Stan and so many others, and people like you to get out there and talk about some of these fringy subjects that are a little on the edge. People are becoming, as I've said it so many times, people are becoming more and more open-minded to things, and more, hey, years ago to talk about some of the stuff they think you were crazy, to make a film about the stuff they think you were crazy. But things are changing. They really and truly are. And, I just like to let people come on the show. I don't do any big fancy scripted type of thing. Just have some fun, learn some things, get some opinions. But with Stan, there's been some events, that have happened, and I just be honest with you, he has gotten kind of a negative cloud, a black cloud over his head, with some things that came out, whether they're true or not. But let's go ahead and proceed. Let's talk about Stan. How'd you meet him? And first of all, how did you find out about him?
It's an interesting the way it all happened. As I mentioned, we're working on the idea of this New Mexico film to the point where we're actually looking at RVs and ready to go on this trip. And Jack was out in Colorado for a weekend event with Stephen Greer. And while he was out at the event, this was back in the spring of 2009.
Okay.
So he was at this event, had a chance to meet with a couple of the investigators that were involved in Stan's investigation over the years. And over the course of the 3-day weekend, he got to hang out with these guys a little bit more, to the point where they went to dinner 2 nights, and on the second night they brought some of the evidence, visual evidence, images that they had and showed him, and he was blown away, primarily with some of the pictures that had been taken of the hybrid children. So he gives me a call on that second night and said, I think we found a better story to tell. So that was in May of 2009, and we didn't have a conversation with Stan until about October. But we started to do the research. We were interested in it, and at the time it was in the hands of a different production company that Jack and I were both involved with. But there was a startup in that area with another producer who was interested in the story as well. And that lasted for about 1.5 years, and then it kind of fell apart as a result of not being able to find money. And Jack and I decided that we wanted, because we invested so much time, that we wanted to move forward with it. So we assumed the contract and kind of moved forward. But the first part about meeting and talking with Stan was we had to reach out and say that we heard about a story, we were interested in making a film. Mm-hmm. So the initial conversations were around, a lot of people want to make this is coming from Stan, a lot of people want to make my film, but why are you guys the right guys? Why should I talk to you? I don't even know who you are. I've never heard of you. And our whole thing was, we want to tell a story that will reach the widest audience possible, as opposed to something that would pander to the fringes and just, regurgitate your story in a way that only the people who have been following you. So we wanted to bring it to the center, take a very unusual story, something that is counterculture, a little bit unconventional, and present it in a way that would allow people in more of the center to absorb it, think about it, ponder it, have conversations, and then draw their own conclusions. So once we started talking with him about that, he was under the impression that we were looking to make his story make a story about him, as opposed to try to present him in a certain light, put him on a pedestal or tear him apart. We just wanted to say, this is what's happened. Here's what he's documented. Here's what we've seen. We've asked the questions. It's an interesting story.
Sure.
So there are people out there who say, like, well, you didn't do the story justice because you didn't look at the other side. And I said, my response to that is, I wanted to tell a story. I didn't want to do investigative journalism piece. This is a story about a man in his journey. And are there bumps in the road? Yeah, there's plenty of bumps in the road, but those are well documented. And anybody who wants to go out and do a little bit of research on Stan, you just look up his name, and you'll find hundreds of thousands of hits on his name. And there's plenty of information that has been discussed over the years. But really, what we wanted to do is get people who may have never heard about his story before to connect to his story, and then let them do their own research, find out a little bit more. If they want to go and do the research and find about the current affairs, and we'll talk about those in a little bit too.
Sure.
But our whole thing initially, when we started to talk with him, it was earning trust. And there was a lot of bridge-building conversations in the first 3 or 4 months to get us to a point where he felt comfortable moving forward. And what really kind of brought it all together for us, for people who are familiar with Stan's story and some of the things that have happened, when we were engaging with him, had several Audrey calls where Audrey either came into calls that we were on or reached out directly to us to kind of introduce us, I guess, in some ways help Stan understand that we were, if you believe all of this, and I was a skeptic coming in, not a skeptic to UFOs, but until I knew more about Stan and met him in person, I didn't know. I'd read his book. I needed some validation in spending time with him to make sure that this was the right story. And some of the early phone calls were, Stan, we're interviewing you as much as you are interviewing us. We need to make a determination at the end of the day whether or not this is a film we want to put our name on. And one of the comments that I made to him early on is that, you might be a little bit wary of us, but we're also wary of you.
Now, the Audrey calls, is this the kind of computerized kind of voice type thing that he gets quite a few of? I mean, other people have claimed to gotten these too, but I mean, that's something that seems to be pretty persistent with him.
Yeah, he said it was something that happened quite a bit from I think it was around 2004, 2005, all the way through. I think the last call was about a year ago. There hasn't been one in a while. But it started with the former head of the production company and Jack were on a call with Stan, and the voice came on and basically was saying that this is a project that you need to take the reins and run with it. It was I don't remember exactly what was said on that call. I wasn't on it, but I do recall that the message basically was, this is an important story. It needs to get out there, kind of like you have our support type of message. And after that call, Stan was kind of eased a little bit on, okay, maybe these are the right guys. And then about a week later was the kind of solidifying moment for Stan. I was on a conference call with 3 other people unrelated to this project, and I was primarily listening in on the call. So I was on my landline phone, and as I'm on this call, I'm on mute, listening in. My cell phone rings, and I look down at it, and it says that my home phone is calling me. And my home phone was the call that I was on the home phone on that conference call. So I thought that was kind of strange. I answered it. There was nothing there at all, so I hung up. 2 or 3 minutes later, the phone rang again. I stepped away from the table, answered it, said hello, and then that time I heard 3 clicks. And after the 3 clicks, it started to ring, and I just assumed that it was going to be an operator coming up, the recorded voice saying, please hang up, and, that message. But after about 3 or 4 rings, there's a voice on the other end that says, hello. And I said, hello, who is this? And he said, this is Stan. Who's this? I said, this is John. I said, did you call me? He goes, no, I didn't call you. You called me. And I said, no, I didn't call you. And then within the next it was probably about the next minute and a half, there was 2 other people, Patrick, who was involved in the film, and then another woman who we were working with at that time doing some development on the front end, potentially being involved in the project, was also brought into the call in the same circumstances where their phone called them, and their home phone called them, and when they answered it, they were connected to our call. So we were on the phone for about an hour, and 3 times during that call, the Audrey voice came in. The first time was about 20 minutes in. It came on and said, can you hear us? And then we all paused, acknowledged that we could, and then there was nothing. And then it came on about 10, 15 minutes later, same type of thing, and can you hear us? We just wanted to let you know that this is an important project. This project needs to move forward. Once you start moving on this film will, how you say, hit the ground running.
Right.
And so we got that and that was another endorsement. And then it came on one more time at the end. Jack wasn't on the call. He was unavailable from his phone. And the voice came on again and said, please let Jack know we're sorry that he missed the call, but please relay this information to him. It's important that he's involved as well. So all of a sudden, this consolidation of thought happened on that call. And Stan, when we were done with that call, he said, well, if you guys are good enough for Audrey, you're good enough for me. And ever since then, we've been involved in the project. Not to say that there weren't some. I mean, the first part I had mentioned was raising money, which takes a lot of time.
Sure.
And the other part was with Stan about the usage of his assets. So with him, he's very protective of his story, and his biggest fear, based on things that have been presented in the past, were that they were going to present him in a light that makes him look foolish. Not challenge him, but he's okay with that. He was more concerned about somebody trying to make him look bad. He had, the Larry King show when he was on with Jeff Peckman and showed the image, not even the alien in the window video, but just the photo. And he was, kind of skewered on that show with the guest debunkers that Larry had on. And then there was another 2020 show that was done on him where they were told up front that it was going to be a kind of a expose on what they've been going through, but it wound up turning into a little bit of a witch hunt,
right.
And the story was negative. So he was gun-shy. And he had worked with 2 other production companies on the documentary, and both had fallen apart. So he was very, very nervous, very, very close to the vest, and a lot of that trust-building conversation before so it took about a year and a half of that in that time frame to get everything kind of ironed out and to a point where we could move forward with actual talking about, okay, now we can move into production discussions because all the pre-production work was behind us. But it was a long journey, and it's one that I think that most people who don't understand what sometimes has to be done when you're talking about autobiographical stories is that there's contracts involved, and that there's time frames that require a lot of back and forth, and there's money that needs to be raised. So there's been some people over the course of the last 3-4 years who have said, where the heck is this film? Why is it taking so long? So it wasn't until we've had this forum of late over the last couple of months where we've been on several radio shows and have had a chance to talk about it to help people understand that it's quite the journey to make an independent film, and especially when you're dealing with someone's story that they're so protective of it. There was a lot of delicacies in that process, but I think as we earned his trust, he allowed us more and more access to his story.
Well, it is an interesting story, and there's really, it seems like in the community, and I'm not talking about I'm not necessarily talking about a lot of the listeners, but I'm saying in the ufologist community, it seems like there's a lot of people that believe what happened has happened to him. I myself, with all the encounters he's had and interviewing him and Lisa, I believe there's truth to it. I mean, I can't see Stan making a ton of money off of this type of thing, writing a couple of books. I mean, it isn't like he's been approached, it isn't like Steven Spielberg is going to do a film about him. It seems like a guy that is that's being quite tortured, and sometimes it sounds so crazy, if you will, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's like there is something here. There is something going on. There's got to be some truth to this, because it's just so the things that have happened to this guy are so out of the norm.
Yeah, and that's one of the things and I can say this to people out in your audience who may be a little bit wary of his story, based on the handful of events that they might be exposed to. So the main things that have been, that have discredited him over the years has been primarily the way that the Boo video, the alien in the window video, was handled initially. First there were the images that were on Larry King, and then when the video came out, people made their own versions of it, and it turned into just ripping Stan's apart. So when people are looking for that story, they're seeing that there's all this other stuff that's lampooning it, making fun of it. So those are two things. So the lie detector test on George Norrie show that he failed, and even on Coast to Coast, they've been saying over the last several months that they can understand that if someone's on medications, it could affect the chemistry, could affect the outcome of a lie detector test. Stan, I'm sure if you talk to him, he has his own opinion on that. I'm not, defending either side. It's not the story for me to really pick a side on. What happened, and it was presented to the masses. So most people know his story for a lot of negative things, in addition to all the amazing things. But they have to dig deeper, because when you first do a search, the things that really show up more than anything are some of the ones that have got the most attention, which happen to be the controversial stuff.
Right.
So just recently, you have the Peter Maxwell Slattery show that he was on with the pen cap flipping that just went nuts earlier this year, and then the allegations that he's now facing. The timing of the interview with Peter Maxwell Slattery and the arrest couldn't have been worse for us, because we showed the film at a film festival last fall. We were engaged in conversations with a few distribution companies out in Hollywood, and as soon as that the child pornography charges were brought up, that door just shut. That was no longer an option for us. Nobody wanted to touch that, with a 10-foot pole. So we had to go to Plan B, which was self-distribution, which is why we're doing what we're doing through the altpov.tv. We can talk about that a little bit more, but yeah, no, Stan's story, I think the challenge with it is there is information out there that people, when they see it, they form an immediate opinion on him, and whether that's good or bad. So there's really not a lot of middle ground. There are people who either really support him or people who think he is a hoaxer out for fame and glory, which I can attest that that's not the case, because there's very little fame. As I'm sure you know over the years in talking with people, ufologists don't make money. They do it because they're driven to do it. They're driven to tell stories. They're driven to document what's happened for, the day that the disclosure finally comes, that it's all there. It's all there for consumption. It validates a certain part of it. I had conversations with Stan in the beginning, and he even said to me, he says, "Do you think that a documentary film will make a lot of money?" And I said, "Stan, you got to be realistic with something like this. It's a matter of," I said, if you look at box office for feature films or documentary films that are theatrical releases, I mean, the best ones, I think 4 of the top 10 are Michael Moore movies, and the top ones don't make a lot of money. Once you get down to below top 10, it's probably less than $1 million for box office. And I said, that's films, since they started documenting box office with documentaries going back to the 80s. So I said, the chances of this, you can't go into this thinking this is going to make any money at all. And one of the sobering conversations was, you do realize, Stan, that in order to make a penny on this, we have to pay off all of the expenses that were incurred to make the film first. So, if there's ever going to be a penny made, it's not going to be for a while until, there's an opportunity to... So that's one of the reasons why we've even had people ask, well, why are you charging for the film? Well, we have to pay back the money that was put into it. And we didn't have any investors. It's all loans. We did personal loans from a handful of people who were huge supporters and believed in the project, and we're thankful for that. But we have to pay their money back first and foremost, and we're putting a lot of effort into raising awareness about the story, because I believe, and the reason why I wanted to make this film from the very beginning, is that it creates a conversation. It can reach a wide audience, and it provides the opportunity for discussion, debate, awareness, continued learning, and when that conversation rises up from the shadows and into the mainstream, it accelerates knowledge across the board about every other case and every other piece of information that's out there. So it's something that's about kind of the snowball down the hill. We feel that if we put the effort to get this film out there, it can be a conversation starter.
Well, the story is just, the story is just so extraordinary to begin with. And again, all the events that surround it, and like to get into some of the details. John, we got to take a quick commercial break to help pay the light bill over here, as you know that goes.
Okay.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Fringe Radio Show. Our guest tonight is John Sumple. John, again, thank you so much for giving us some time here on your weekend.
No problem. Pleasure to be here.
So, let me ask you. We got a bunch of questions sent in since we started here, and we'll get to those. But when you were with Stan and his family, I assume that did you spend quite a bit of time with him? I mean, did you live on at his home for a while to make this film, or was it a collection of things he had? How did you put this all together and hanging around with Stan? I mean, a lot of weird things happen.
Yeah, no, that was an important part. I think for us is to see the side of Stan's life, which was the everyday living part, which was to go back to what we were talking about before. It helped me realize that, as I said, I was a little bit skeptical at all the stuff that I had read in the book and the things that I had seen on the internet. Is it possible that all this stuff was happening to him? Is it storytelling? Is it enhanced? Is it like the fish story that kind of gets out of control? But there are certain parts of it that are just hard to explain away. And it wasn't until I had a chance to spend time with him that I realized that, he is just an ordinary guy. He's like your friend, your next door neighbor, a family member. He is not he's not a weirdo. We didn't know what to expect, and our first meeting was in December of 2009. We spent 3 days with his family, and I had no idea what we were going to encounter. I'd only had probably a dozen or two phone calls with him leading up to that, but we had earned the right to the next step, which was to meet with him. And we were there for a 3-day weekend, and I was really impressed the second I walked in his front door, because we were greeted as if we were, family.
Right.
Warm, friendly people, roll out the carpet for you. Our house is your house. Enjoy your time here. Very, very friendly. And part of me, just a little bit was like, are they kind of going out of their way to make us feel, overly welcome? But the more and more I spent time with them, we spent another 10 days with them going over all the evidence several months later in June of 2010. And that was, to me, that was sealed the deal for me. And we were still in the negotiation process and working through all of that. But when I had a chance to sit down and review everything that he had, I just couldn't believe it. So, and that's the part that I think is, if everybody could spend time with Stan the way that we have in making this film, they would realize that this is a guy who's not going out of his way to create stories. I've read debunkers who have said that the whole family's involved and there's kids on the roof with a spotlight and they orchestrate all of this. And my comment to that, after having seen everything, is why would a guy spend so much effort for 14 years to try to propagate a story that he's being constantly ridiculed for? Who would do that? That's one thing. And the other part about it is, based on the experience that I've had and the research that I've done and the evidence that I've looked at in his case, he's been monitored for 14 years. Why? What has he done that, he's an average guy? He's a blue-collar, gray-collar guy does he warrant that type of monitoring if he's just a normal citizen? Probably not. So, again, spending the time, seeing the evidence, having the conversation, seeing the people that are around them, you start to realize that there is something very unusual about the experiences that he's had. Now, I'll be the first to say that I don't know if all of this stuff is true. Right. And even one of the investigators, says it on there. He said, even if 40% of Stan's evidence is true, experiences are true, it's still profound. And the one the thing that people keep going back to as kind of the sweet spot in his story are the equations. And the equations are something that are pretty profound because the experts that have been involved, Claude Swanson, who's a physicist, PhD, he said, I know Stan, I've spent a lot of time with Stan and reviewing these. I can tell you that this is not his area of expertise, and he's not good with math, and this is not something that he could do. You know, is he really going to try to memorize these things and draw them with his eyes closed or at night with the lights off and draw them in such perfect form? He's practicing this like he's, doing a performance? No. You know, these are things that are happening, and when people analyze them, math is a universal language. There's no room for misinterpretation. It is what it is. What he's written and the things that have been investigated, there are interesting stories there. And one of the things that's discussed in the film is that there are alternative theories to physics. And just because what we have been taught and what we know to be true, Newtonian and Einstein physics, doesn't necessarily mean that there are alternative perspectives. And Claude goes on to talk a little bit about the fact that there are people out there for the past 100 years who've been exploring alternative physics, which are representative in Stan's equations. So it's not like Stan just made these up. It's not like he found a book and memorized and wrote them down. There has been information surrounding these theories that Stan has written in conjunction with the equations that have experts wondering if this truly is about space-time travel, about propulsion-related technologies and concepts. And those things are profound. We could do an entire documentary film just on the equations, and it would probably be a math geek's favorite film. But I don't know if we would get a lot of other people to embrace it as wholeheartedly as we would if we did a film showing a little bit of everything. But that's one of the fascinating things about his story, and one of the reasons why we were okay with distributing the film through a portal, because we shot 50 hours of footage, and we can continue to put more and more of this information out onto this website that kind of fills in some of the gaps and goes a little bit deeper into the story. So the traditional film goes out, it has its run, it kind of loses its steam and momentum and lives, with occasional views here and there, but we have the ability to keep the story going and dig a little bit deeper into a story as a result of having the ability to have it live on the web.
When you were there filming, John, did any weird things, or well, I shouldn't say weird things, but did any strange things happen? I mean, I know Lisa talks about people, entities in the home and stuff like that. Did you see anything? Kind of the
yeah, the very first day that we were there, they have a split level ranch, and I was going to be staying down in the basement in one of the rooms in a converted basement. And I was walking down the steps at one point that first night. It was dark out. In the hallway that I was in, there was no windows. The doors were closed to the room. So as I was walking down the steps, I saw a flash of red light about 10, 15 feet in front of me. And it wasn't like a strobe. And it wasn't something that came from the outside. Again, there were no windows. It was like a burst of light that radiated about maybe 3 feet, about 15 feet in front of me. So it was as if it materialized right in front of me, and it was a flash. It was gone in a second. But I saw something. I paused on the stairs, and I continued to walk down. I wasn't freaking out because I know a lot more now than I did then. And so I walked down into the room, got something out of one of my bags, and came back upstairs. And a little bit later on that night, I mentioned to Stan about seeing the light. I didn't say anything about it right away. And he said, "Oh, that's interesting." He said, "Because I saw some flashes down there earlier in the day, and I took some photos." So he showed me the photos, and two of the photos had shadows in between the camera and the door of the room that I went into, that I was staying in. And it was interesting because the shadow was casting a shadow on the door. So there was something there in front. And Stan said he says, "That's where I saw the flash of light, so I started taking pictures." And after he showed me that, this was probably around 11:30 at night, I'm thinking to myself, and that's the room I'm staying in? So day one, that was the first experience. And then when we were there for the week, several months later, to look over all the evidence, there were two occasions where we had water faucets turn on. Stan, Jack, and I were sitting in the family room. The kitchen is half a level up. You could see into the kitchen. There was nobody there. and all of a sudden the water in the faucet turns on full blast. And it's not one of those, handles that you lift up that's pressure. I've done investigations before where there's pressure-related things that could cause that to happen. These are turn knobs. So how did it go from being completely off to completely full blast? There's nobody there. So that was one. And then another time we were up in one of the bedrooms, the master bedroom, and there was a bathroom off of that. It was just me, Jack, and Lisa that were working on a computer there. Same thing happened in the bathroom. Nobody else in the house. Turn handle, water goes on full blast. So Jack and I, the hair on the back of your neck stands up when something like that happens, and Stan and Lisa are like, "Oh, that's nothing. That happens all the time." Wait till you hear the knocking on the roof, or you hear the sounds outside that make you go outside, and then you hear crashes back in the house. And when you go inside, there's a chair knocked over, and there's things like that. They said this happens all the time. So we had, other than the water and the flash of light, I wouldn't say that there was anything significant. I know that when we were shooting the film, we were down in Arizona and to see one of Stan's presentations, and on a drive out to a night watch, sky watch, there was 30 or 40 people that were driving out there that all saw a UFO. We followed up about an hour later, so we missed out on that. But on the drive over, several people saw it. So that's one of the things that makes Stan's story a little bit more compelling and for people to relate to, is that when he has his experiences, he doesn't have them alone. So from his very first sighting back in 2000 to the 3 or 4 that happened right after that, there were always other people who were there and saw what he saw. So it was never a matter of him. It's not like he got abducted and showed up on a dirt road and nobody saw it, nobody experienced it. People are there with him when he's seeing things. Right. So those are the type of things that help corroborate his story a little bit, because there are witnesses there. There are other people who've seen it, and all of those things have been documented by him. And that's one of the things that I think has been fascinating about his story, is that he has done the documentation. So when you're spending the time and you're looking over all of the information that he has, you start to realize that because of the sheer volume of things that are a part of his case, you have to give it some sort of a there's got to be a sliver of acceptance, even to a skeptic or a debunker, because if you see all of it, if you spend the time that we did looking at the evidence and spending the time with Stan, you realize that this is not a guy with an agenda. He's not making any money off of it. He's not. There's no ego involved in this. It is definitely something that I just can't imagine somebody wanting to perpetuate a hoax for 14 years and get slammed by it constantly. Why would anybody do that?
Well, and that's I mean that's kind of my take on it too, is that I don't see any big these UFO conferences. I know that looking into putting one on here, John. I mean, these guys, you buy them. I don't know about Stan, but even some of the big names, you buy them an airline ticket on Southwest or the cheapest airfare and put them in a place that's not dirty, and you give them $400, and that's all they're asking for. You could probably make more at a garage sale. So
Yep.
I agree with you. I don't, unless I'm really missing something, and you are, and I don't think we are. I don't think there's any hidden big money agenda somewhere.
No, and I've said this before too. Is there a chance that this is all fabricated? Yeah, of course there is. Until there's the alien on the White House lawn, it's all based on faith and searching for evidence and proof, and getting closer and closer and closer based on the wealth of information that's provided. But my whole part with that is that I don't believe that it's a hoax because of the time that I've spent. But if it is, it's the greatest hoax ever perpetuated on mankind, because of the amount of effort that would go into something like this, and the ability to keep whoever is involved quiet for 14 years, to not do something wrong.
You know what? We got a quick NBC News break. I'm not even watching my clock. John, can we keep you for another go-around?
Sure, let's do it.